Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
If you are a longtime listener of Money Matters, you know that we always reserve just the first few moments of the show to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the Houston and the Gulf Coast area when it comes to finance and financial literacy. Well, we are here smack dab in the middle of April Financial Literacy Month, or what we know here in Houston as Houston Money Week. This has officially kicked off, and we are right in the middle of it. So there are hundreds of financial literacy events going on throughout Houston and even the Gulf Coast area, Woodlands, Conroe, Prairie View A&M. We're right in the middle of it. So I would encourage people to go to HoustonMoneyWeek.org, and that will actually give you a list or a dynamic calendar of all of the different financial education events that are free, open to the public, but are either in your zip code. If you want to look at it that way by putting your zip code in there, it'll tell you which events are around you. Or if you're looking for a specific topic. I know, we're pretty much almost past, we're right at tax day here, but a lot of our nonprofit partners participate in the VITA program. And the VITA program actually will do free tax preparation for low to moderate income. So if that's something that you're still looking for, you've got a few days here. You could reach out and look at that as a topic, but we have so many other topics and so many things going on. I know one of my big draws or favorite Houston Money Week events is the art car parade. So not only is KPFT, who has an art car parade that is these radio station that we're on, but separate from that, Houston Money Week has an art car as well. And so we encourage everybody to go out, see that. That it goes. I believe it starts around 10 o'clock, and it's on the Allen Parkway. Huge event, and that is just one of the things we are doing for Houston Money Week. With that being said, let's go ahead and get Megan on the line here. Megan, are you there?
I am. Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for joining the show this morning.
Thank you for having me. I have to tell you, I'm really excited to hear you talk about the VITA program. I'm a tax professional as well. And, for all listeners out there, it is a really great program. You get very qualified preparers helping you navigate your taxes. And this is a really tough year for taxes because there are so many changes. So I love to hear that the Houston area is really involved with VITA and getting people out there to get their taxes prepared. Oh,
awesome. Yeah, it's such a great program. I just wish more people knew about it.
Yeah. You would think that more people would know about it. I'm in San Francisco, and we have VITA, and we also have one called Tax Aid. And what most people don't realize is it's a lot of the big tax firms that are providing the people there to help input returns. So you're getting CPAs, you're getting tax attorneys, you're getting enrolled agents, people with really deep tax backgrounds, and they're going to do your return. So if you need your return and you're low to moderate income, go check it out.
That's fantastic. So that's definitely a thing we have in common here. Well, let the listeners know a little bit more about you. So I'm going to share your bio. You have been, what you say, coloring outside of the lines from an early age and continue to do so today. You're the founding partner of, tell me if I'm saying this right, Chequers?
Chequers.
Chequers.
It's actually it's a house in England.
Okay. I'm glad I asked. So, Chequers Financial Management. You are a woman owner of a business in an industry that doesn't typically see many women in the top leadership role. Add to the fact that Chequers is a boutique high net worth tax and financial planning firm. You are also a contributor to Forbes. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. It's I think personal finance is such a complex area, and it touches all of our lives.
Well, one of the things before we got on the air, we were talking about Gen X and finance and how we relate to that. And I, even though I read Gen X in my head, I saw millennials because you've heard so many shows and articles about millennials and finance, and so it's like, wait, Gen X is still a thing.
Right, we're still here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit, because I know that you had an article on Forbes there talking about why Gen X is not a forgotten financial generation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and Gen X, is typically defined as people who were born between the years of 1965 and 1980. And I'm a Gen Xer. I was born in the mid 70s, and so much of the personal finance world, because there's such large generational cohorts, focus on boomers and millennials, and we're sort of this little generation in the middle. And I say little because compared to the population of boomers, millennials, and Gen Z, we are a small group. But we're there in the middle, and we don't really get looked at a lot. And, it's interesting because a couple of months ago, there was a Saturday Night Live special or game show on Saturday Night Live, and it was about the different generations. And, they had boomers out there, millennials, and then one of the guys looked at the camera and he said, "I'm Gen X. I just sit on the sidelines and watch the world burn." And it sort of sums us up. But I think the thing is, this is not poor Gen X. I think that Gen X is really an interesting generation. We are sandwiched between two generations that need our help. And, Chris, I don't know if you remember growing up in the 70s and 80s, but, we are the last generation that we would go to school in the morning, and then we'd come home, and our parents weren't home. They were working, or we were living in single-parent households. And we'd come home, let ourselves in the house, make a sandwich, go out and play. We were sort of independent as children. And I think that independent streak sort of carries us into where we are today. So it's not that we're overlooked. It's just that unlike the boomers and millennials, we don't look to have this group mindset that we're going to go take on the world. We're all very focused on doing things independently.
I would totally, as a former latchkey kid, I would.
Right? Remember that term? I don't think that term exists today.
No, you would be you would be frowned upon as a parent, and if you let your kids stay out past the dusk, different thing, different generation there. So I would agree with that. I like that. What other things, as Gen Xers, should we be aware of?
Well, Gen X is going through an interesting period of time. So, if you think about it, most of us, the youngest Gen Xers are in their early 40s, and the oldest Gen Xers are in their mid-50s. And we are in that part of our lives where we're hitting the strides in our career, we're making money, but yet we've got pressures on both sides, right? So we've got pressures because we're raising children, and the cost of education has changed completely since we were trying to go to college. And the burden on Gen X parents is substantial, right? The average college education today, the average median cost, I believe, is $37,000 in this country. And parents out there who are looking at college costs today know that it's a lot higher, really. And then on the other side, when you hit your 40s and 50s, this is where your parents start to have a lot of issues, right? Parents have caretaking issues. Boomers are financially stressed. And so we're sort of in the middle here. And so we're trying to help our children. We're trying to help our parents. And then we've got to sort of focus on ourselves because we're the first generation that's really coming out that doesn't have the option of a pension. Now, I know you could say boomers have a little bit of that, but remember, boomers started working in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So they did still take part in an economy that was very pension-driven. And Gen X isn't. And so for Gen Xers, as a mindset, we're very independent, but we've got all these stresses. And so I think from a financial perspective, it's about how do you prioritize. And I don't know, Chris, in your own life, in your own personal finances, and working with Gen X clients. But do you see this sort of tension that exists in their lives?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that, and I actually tend to focus on boomers more for my practice, but I do have a handful of Gen X in there as well, and I would totally agree. The goals you mentioned, the getting the kids through school, that's definitely a stressor, and then the fact that the parents in the age where there are possible financial issues where they're trying to retire and deal with issues that they haven't in the past. I thought it was interesting that you mentioned about the pension option, because that's true. As we have moved away from pensions, a lot of that responsibility for saving has shifted, and you're looking at a generation that has grown up almost solely with that. So that's interesting, definitely interesting.
Yeah, and I think the issue with pensions, right, is, back when the whole pension system was created, and actually the pension system could arguably say be created back in the Roman time, but, modern pensions were made when people lived to 60, 65 years old. So the other thing that has to factor in with Gen X is there's a really good chance we're going to live to 100, because the silent generation is living well into their 90s. So if the boomers do better than the silents, we've got longevity. And so, what I would tell most Gen Xers is, look, there's going to be two buckets you have to sort of manage in retirement. You're going to get a little bit from the government with Social Security, but our full retirement age isn't going to be until 67, 68 years old. And then the other portion is self-managed. Now, when you're a Gen Xer, you're sort of forced to look at all these priorities. And I think that there are different accounts that can help us manage some of the stresses. So I want to just sort of touch base on sort of what I would call a three-prong approach to managing Gen X finances. I think the first prong is your traditional retirement plan approach. So, whether it's a 401k, a 403b, an IRA, or a Roth IRA, or a SEP IRA, Gen X has to fund these. And, really has to focus on, especially with the employer-based plans, funding at least enough to get to get the employer match. And Gen X has to fund these accounts with an eye on longevity. So if you're sitting there today and you're 46, 47 years old, and you're looking out, you've got to think, okay, my time horizon is not 20 years. My time horizon is 60 years. And so you've got to be unafraid to enter the equity market. So that's sort of the first prong. The second prong is Gen X is going to have Medicare, but that's not going to be enough for them. And this is really where you can do some unique tax planning and retirement planning. And that is because Fidelity estimates that the average couple who is 65 today will need $283,000 to get through health care in retirement. It's a pretty big number, Chris.
That's huge,
so
yeah.
It's huge. And you think about it, you're like, oh, my God. Because, by the way, today the average Gen Xer who are in their 40s have about $81,000 saved for retirement, and the average Gen Xer in their 50s have about $125,000 saved for retirement. So when you think of $283,000, it's like, whoa, this is crazy. This is a crazy number. But there's a tool out there, and it's getting more and more press, and it's one of the most amazing vehicles out there, and that is the health savings account, or an HSA. And there's a lot of confusion out there because the retirement world is full of acronyms. We love acronyms. So most of the time, and Chris, when you're dealing with clients, I'm assuming you run into this, you say HSA, and they look at you and they say FSA. Does that happen to you?
Yes, that I'm smiling. Even though we're on radio, you can't see I'm smiling because, yes, that has happened.
Yeah. So flex savings accounts, or FSAs, are use it or lose it accounts, right? You need to get glasses, you need to pay prescriptions in the current year. That's what you fund it for. HSAs are different, and they are what I would tell you are the holy grail of tax and retirement planning because they are triple tax exempt. So what it is if you have a high deductible plan with your employer, and let me tell you, most employers are moving to these plans. They want people using them. You get a high deductible plan, and you open a health savings account. And when you fund the health savings account, you get a tax deduction. Then you have to invest the money. Less than 3% of all HSA users are investing the money in HSAs. But go in there and invest it. Do a great target retirement fund. And the money grows tax deferred. And if you take the money out for medical expenses, it's tax free. So think about that.
That's huge.
You're saving money because it rolls year after year, right? And unlike the FSA, you keep growing this thing. And so then, if you can strategize and say, okay, I'm going to hold my HSA, keep it invested every year till I'm 65. And at 65, you've got this account earmarked just for your retiree medical. And then you also have your retirement plan. You sort of have two layers there. You've got sort of the tax-free income stream that you can really maximize. And then you also have your retirement plan. And you have two levers to pull.
That's huge. Are there limits as to how much people can put in the HSA?
Yeah. So first of all, if anyone's out there today who had a high deductible plan and they're thinking, oh, I had that for 2018 and I didn't fund an HSA, the good news is you can still fund an HSA for 2018. You can do it by Monday. And so the HSA limit for 2018 was for people who are single, it was $3,500, and for people who are married, it was $6,900. And if you're over 55, you get to add an extra $1,000. So you can still fund this up until April 15th at midnight. So don't hesitate to go out and do this. It's a really powerful account.
So that you always have
and
people.
Actually, I should make an amend. The actual single coverage was $3,450. My apologies, I said the wrong number.
$450. So I always have people as it gets close to either year end or they're wanting to, or they don't realize the deadline. They're wanting to make contributions in the IRAs. But this is something that should be on their radar as well. From what you mentioned, having the triple tax exemption and being that bucket, that last switch that you're turning on for health expenses, that if you don't have it and you just have your retirement funds, it has to come from somewhere.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, I think you're in Texas. If you're in Texas, do it. So I'm sitting here in California, and of course California is difficult about this because California doesn't let it go in tax. It doesn't give you a tax deduction when you fund it. But in Texas, you're golden. And I think for women in particular, right, if you're sitting there today saying, oh, do I fund my IRA or can I fund an HSA? HSA all the way. It is a no-brainer because it's tax-free on the distribution. And I think you bring up a good point with that, Chris.
This is actually something that you've written about on Forbes as well. You have the article, Gen X Women, the time is now to embrace health savings accounts.
Yeah. I mean, women historically have lived longer lives, right? We're the caretakers. And so we often don't take care of ourselves, right? We're the ones juggling. And so, when you think about it, where medical expenses get expensive is late 80s and the 90s. And I say that because Gen X on the whole is a pretty healthy generation. I mean, most Gen Xers I know are physically active. We've really embraced that. And that's going to help us on the healthcare costs on the front end of retirement. But on the back end, it's very hit or miss. Who's going to get sick? Who's going to need help? And so if I'm a Gen X woman and I'm sitting there, this is the magic account. This is what's going to help you.
So that is something that, again, it's not one of those traditional things you hear a lot about, but having the way that you're approaching it with when you mentioned earlier the longevity, that Gen X has the possibility of living to be 100. I know we're here in Houston. We have the medical center right down the road. Every day they are making new discoveries, cures. There is a high possibility that our generation is going to live longer than the generation that precedes it. So having some kind of plan for those healthcare expenses and even retirement is huge. What other things would you tell Gen Xers besides just the HSA that we need to have on our radar?
I think the last part is, right, the third prong of a Gen X strategy is, we were able to all go to college when we didn't have to take college private student loans. The rules all changed for student loans in 2001. And most of us had graduated by that point in time. So we came out with student loan debt. I have it today still, but it wasn't as arduous as we're seeing our children's generation deal with. And so, the third prong of a Gen X strategy is really, we've got to make sure we're doing the 529. 529s are a great vehicle for our children. We put the money in. You don't get any tax. It depends on the state you're in. Some states give you tax benefits if you fund a 529 plan. But the money grows tax-free, and it comes out tax-free if your child uses it for qualified education expenses. So if you sort of think of these three prongs, right, retirement plan account, HSA, 529, you've got to think of it as a Gen Xer, whether you're single or you're married. You've got to think about, okay, if I have X amount on an annual basis to save, how much should I put in each bucket? Because you should do something. And that brings up this idea that, unfortunately, human nature is such that we're all great procrastinators, myself included. I'll tell you, the last tax return I do every tax season is my own. And, it's one of these things where rather than rushing to do this at tax season, what I would tell every Gen Xer right now out there is do what you can by April 15th. Get 2018 squared away with funding IRAs and HSAs for 2018. But then for this year, put yourself on an automatic plan. So every month, put something in the retirement plan, something in the HSA, and something in the 529 plan. And just set it and forget it. And that's because really and I work with a lot of wealthy people, most of my clients will have moments where they have big wealth moments, but a lot of it is wealth accrual in little bits over a long period of time. And it might not seem like a big deal to save an extra, $1,000 a year. But compound that over 20 or 30 years, and you start to have real numbers. And so, all of these investment accounts that are out there are set up so you can have something go in. Or my favorite thing, Chris, and I don't know if you do this with clients, is go to your payroll department and have a couple of different direct deposits. And put $50 a month into your IRA, $100 a month into your HSA that comes direct out of your paycheck. And really just do that automatic saving. Because this is where our fierce independence as a generation can serve us well. And I think that ultimately Gen X can be more financially successful than the boomers, than the millennials, because we're not, running around as a pack looking for attention. We are self-starters. We're independent. We like to do it ourselves. We do our own thing. And that's the beauty of our generation.
I love what you said about big wealth moments, the idea that, because there is what I would say a misconception out there of some of the most financially successful clients there's this idea, this stereotype of what they look like. And they might have these big wealth moments throughout their life, but it does boil down to a lot of the very successful ones of small incremental growth and those automatic payments to your direct deposit through your human resources department. Say boring, don't seem sexy. However, this is that habit that I see, that ability to save out of sight, out of mind, putting it on auto deduction is. If I had to point to one thing, my most successful clients are able to do that. So I love how you said that, because those big wealth moments, they may come once or twice, but the ones that are really successful, they have built with that.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I work with a lot of wealthy corporate executives, right? And it's always so many of my clients get excited when at the end of the year I'm like, okay, we funded this in the 401k, we did this to the IRA, this to the HSA. They're like, yes, and it's you feel like you're doing the right thing, and it's just a great feeling to go forward and do this stuff. So, look, this weekend is a great weekend. Anybody, boomer, millennial, Gen X, or Gen Xer, go take an hour, figure this out, set up these accounts, and do it, because you will feel so good when you get this organized.
We've got just a few minutes, about 4 more minutes before the end of the show here, but what would you say your experience working with people in finances and taxes are some of the biggest roadblocks that prevent them from being successful?
You know, and I say it because I deal with it myself in my own financial life. We're all so busy nowadays, right? And I think that one of the things that most, you know, and I think robo-advisors are a great thing, right? I think that they work for a lot of people. But I do think that, like hiring a personal trainer, you know, like going to the doctor, personal finance requires, it's a bit of therapy. And I think the big roadblock for people is that they don't stop and sit down, whether it's themselves if they're single, or with their partner, whether they're married or coupled up, and just have a third party work with them and hold the mirror up. Because when someone holds the mirror up and says, Chris, look, I know you want to get here, but I need you to do these 3 things, and I'm going to make sure you do it, it has a different, it just creates a different path to success. And so I think that the biggest roadblock is we don't all have someone that forces us to sit down, carve out the time, and kick the can around on these ideas, right? You know, why am I doing this? Why should I prioritize this over that? You know, and I think that that's the roadblock, is that most people struggle with carving the time out, because the time, when you don't carve the time out, you don't figure out your financial priorities. You just make decisions in the moment.
So I love that. I would just piggyback off of that and agree. The idea of bringing in a third party or a second set of eyes, even if you take it out of the realm of finances, just to be held accountable for things that you say that you want to do, that's huge. And a lot of times it just boils down to people having trouble asking for help. There is resources out there available, but they, like you mentioned earlier, they don't stop or sit down to take a look at these things, kind of like the ostrich that buries their head in the sand.
And by the way, and one of the things of really successful, wealthy people, because I work with people who have 8, 9-digit net worth, is they are unafraid to ask for help. They will say, okay, this is important. I need help. Can you help me? And I think the thing is, we're all, you know, want to feel so strong about stuff. But, you know, I'll tell you, a lot of the wealthy people out there confide in someone and have someone because they're insecure about it at times. So if people who have net worth like that feel insecure, you know, the average person like you and me, and, you know, that's why it's so important to have someone to talk to, because we're all insecure about money. You know, it's all about making sure that we can feel safe.
Absolutely. Now, for listeners who'd like to find out more about Megan, you can visit the website, thewealthintersection.com. Now, that's going to be kind of your online, your writings and that sort of stuff. If they're there in San Francisco or they're in California and they're trying to get a hold of you, is there a different website as well?
You know, you can find me at www.checkersfinancial.com, and that's Checkers with a Q. And, you know, you can also find me on Twitter at Wealth Intersect, or on Instagram at The Wealth Intersection. But feel free to go on thewealthintersection.com. You can reach out to me on the email on that there. I love to hear from people, love to hear questions. And, you know, sometimes I just love to hear what people are doing, because it gives me ideas for stories. And I love to be a cheerleader. I'm rooting for everybody to succeed financially.
Absolutely. Megan, thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great weekend.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
And you as well. You have been listening to KPFT Houston.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Money Matters Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, visit us on the web at www.moneymatterspodcast.com. Drop us a line on SpeakPipe on the right-hand corner. It will receive any voicemails, questions, thoughts, concerns that you have about the show. In addition to this, we recently launched a Patreon campaign. Click on the Donate Now tab to hit the tip jar and find out what Patreon's campaign is all about.